The living room looked more like the aftermath of a particularly eccentric wizard's workshop than the home of a suburban pet owner. Treats were scattered across the floor in an arcane pattern. A clicker dangled from a precarious pile of books, and a notebook labeled Nimbus Training Log lay open, filled with hastily scribbled observations and a growing sense of exasperation. I paced back and forth, armed with a handful of treats in one hand and my best attempt at a commanding voice in the other. "Sit, Nimbus," I said, voice firm but hopeful. Or, to be more accurate, I said seed, Nimbus, because by now I was pretty sure that Latin phrases might be the only language this mysterious feline recognized. Nimbus, perched with regal indifference on the windowsill, did not move. His green eyes, those unblinking, piercing orbs, were locked onto me with an expression that could only be described as amused contempt. I swear if cats had a monarchy, Nimbus would be king, and I was the lowly subject fumbling through my royal duties. Undeterred, I crouched down and extended a treat toward him. Here I coaxed, a reward for obedience. Nimbus blinked. No, wait, he didn't blink, he just stared. Then, with the slowness of a celestial event, he lifted a paw and swiped the treat off the windowsill, sending it tumbling onto the floor. He didn't eat it. Instead, he batted it around like some sort of tiny black orb, as if testing its gravity or perhaps mocking my attempts at training. "Very funny," I muttered, picking up the wayward snack. I tried again. This time, I used the clicker, pressing it with an enthusiastic beep. "Sit," I repeated, this time with a mix of desperation and theatrical flair. Nimbus turned his back on me, tail flicking with unmistakable disdain, and sauntered away like a shadow slipping through the room. I sighed and rubbed my temples. Maybe it was time to reconsider my strategy. But stubbornness is a curious thing, especially when it's directed at a cat who might just be a weather-controlling, Latin-speaking enigma. Over the next hour, the battle of wills continued. I set up obstacle courses with pillows, tried to teach Nimbus to come when called, and even attempted to decipher the meaning behind his cryptic Latin mutterings. Each effort was met with either complete indifference or a sly disruption. At one point, Nimbus managed to unroll an entire roll of toilet paper in the hallway, creating a snowy trail that made our cat and human power struggle look more like a winter festival gone awry. Exhausted but not defeated, I flopped down on the couch, clutching my now tattered training log. Nimbus jumped up beside me and, to my surprise, nestled against my side, purring softly. It was a rare moment of warmth from my enigmatic companion, a silent truce in our ongoing war of wills. As I stroked his sleek black fur, I realized that perhaps this was what companionship truly looked like, a messy, unpredictable dance of control and surrender, chaos and calm. And maybe, just maybe, I was learning to appreciate the humor in being thoroughly outmatched by a cat that never blinks. But as I drifted off to sleep with Nimbus curled beside me, I couldn't help but wonder what tricks he had up his sleeve next. Because in this house, the rules were always subject to change, and the cat was still very much in charge. And so, the saga of pet owner antics rolled on, a comedy of errors and affections that I was only beginning to understand. Would I ever train Nimbus? Or was I just another player in his grand, unblinking game? The answer, it seemed, was as elusive as the cat himself. And with that thought lingering in the air, I knew tomorrow would bring another round in this wonderfully absurd battle. The cat might never blink, but I sure wasn't going to stop trying. The sky outside had been an unremarkable suburban gray for most of the day. The kind of dull cloud cover that makes you forget it's actually there until it starts raining. But by late afternoon, that complacent gray began to darken, folding into heavy, swirling charcoal that made the street lamps flicker on early, as though the world was preparing for something ominous. I was staring out the window, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling in my hand, when the first unnerving signs appeared. Nimbus, my sleek black cat, with those unnervingly unblinking green eyes, sat perched on the windowsill as if he were the conductor of this gathering storm. His tail flicked lazily, but his gaze was unyielding, fixed on the growing tempest outside. The wind began to pick up, but it wasn't the usual suburban breeze. It felt deliberate, almost choreographed, swirling leaves and loose papers into a small whirlwind that danced at the edge of the yard. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, gradually swelling into a growl that vibrated through the house's bones. I swallowed hard, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Nimbus," I said, voice wavering, "are you doing this?" Of course, he didn't blink, didn't even twitch his whiskers. It was as if the question was beneath him, or perhaps he was waiting for me to figure it out on my own. My gaze shifted to the weather app on my phone, which stubbornly insisted there was no storm forecasted. "Great," I muttered. "Just great. The kind of great that makes you question your grip on reality." Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Jenkins, the neighborhood's resident eccentric and retired meteorologist, clutching his ever-present notebook with a wild gleam in his eye. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, waving his notebook like a talisman. Inside, the pages were filled with hastily scrawled charts in decipherable symbols, and notes tying Nimbus to inexplicable weather anomalies. "Look at this," Jenkins said excitedly. "Localized atmospheric pressure shifts, electromagnetic disturbances, all centered on your property. This isn't coincidence." "Your cat is the eye of the storm," I blinked. Well, I tried to blink back at Nimbus, but he was already giving me that immortal, unblinking stare, as if to say, "Yes, I am." "Now what?" The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows, and a sudden cold gust swept through the room despite all the windows being firmly shut. I shivered, tension crackling in the air like static. "Okay," I said, more to myself than anyone else, "if you re behind this, Nimbus, then we need to talk." Nimbus responded by stretching luxuriously, letting out a slow, deliberate yawn that revealed a flash of sharp teeth. It was the kind of gesture that said, "Talk all you want, but I decide when the storm ends." I paced the room, searching for any clue, any leverage. Then it struck me the Latin phrases I'd overheard Nimbus muttering during the last week. Maybe this was the key. I crouched down, meeting his gaze, and began to recite what little Latin I'd managed to piece together from my frantic research. Pax Nimbus, temporare tempestatum. The cat's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and the air seemed to thicken. Outside, the wind momentarily stilled, the thunder paused, and a hesitant silence filled the room. Encouraged, I pressed on, awkwardly weaving together a patchwork of Latin phrases that I hoped meant peace and calm. Nimbus blinked, just once. And then the storm outside resumed fiercer than before. I staggered back, heart pounding. "I get it," I gasped. "You re not just a cat. You re a weather god in fur. But why me?" Mr. Jenkins adjusted his spectacles, peering at Nimbus with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "Perhaps you re the chosen mortal, destined to serve as his humble worshipper," he mused. "Chosen?" I echoed, doubtful but strangely relieved to have a narrative, even a ridiculous one. "Well, Mr. Jenkins, I'm not sure I'm cut out for divine worship. I can barely keep a houseplant alive." Nimbus, apparently unimpressed by my self-deprecation, jumped down from the sill and sauntered toward the center of the room. The lights flickered, and a sharp crack of thunder shook the house, sending a shiver down my spine. I watched, part terrified, part fascinated, as the storm seemed to pulse in rhythm with Nimbus's movements. "Okay," I said, steeling myself, "let's make a deal. You stop the storm, and I'll do whatever strange rituals you want. No more indoor thunderstorms, no more temperature swings, and maybe, just maybe, you blink once in a while." Nimbus stopped, turning to look at me with those eternal green eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw something almost like amusement flicker there. Then, with a slow, deliberate blink, nothing. The storm outside began to abate, the thunder rolling away into distant grumbles. Meh. Jenkins let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We may have just witnessed a breakthrough," he whispered. I slumped into the nearest chair, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. My life had become a surreal comedy of weather control and feline worship, and somehow I was beginning to accept it. "Nimbus, I said softly. "You may be the most frustrating roommate I've ever had, but maybe, just maybe, we can weather this storm together." The cat, ever inscrutable, settled into my lap, still unblinking, still commanding. Outside, the clouds broke apart, letting in a hesitant sliver of sunlight. The storm was brewing no more, at least for now. And just like that, the suburban quiet was restored, but I knew better. Nimbus was still watching, still waiting, and the next chapter of our bizarre companionship was just beginning. Negotiating peace with a cat who might control the weather was never something I imagined on a Tuesday afternoon. But here we were, drenched and delirious. In the midst of an indoor thunderstorm that Nimbus, my unblinking feline overlord, had orchestrated with precision and, apparently, a wicked sense of humor. It started with the Latin phrasebook. I had scoured the internet, piecing together what little I could find about the ancient phrases Nimbus muttered under his breath during his silent, statuesque sittings. The words were cryptic, a blend of liturgical incantations and obscure weather-related terms, which only fueled my growing conviction that Nimbus was no ordinary cat. Armed with this dubious knowledge, I set out to negotiate. If Nimbus demanded worship, then worship he would receive, albeit in the most ridiculous, desperate fashion. I cleared the living room, pushing furniture against the walls to create the semblance of a sacred space. In the center, I arranged Nimbus's favorite cat treats around a flickering candle, an altar of sorts for the weather god I had unwittingly adopted. Clutching the phrase book in one hand and a trembling voice in the other, I began the incantation. My Latin was rusty at best, a patchwork of mispronunciations and hopeful guesses, but I soldiered on, my voice echoing oddly against the suburban walls. Nimbus sat on the windowsill, his green eyes piercing and unblinking, watching me with an inscrutable expression that I swear combined disdain, amusement, and maybe a hint of curiosity. As I muttered the phrases, a sudden, inexplicable chill swept through the room. The lights flickered, shadows danced, and then without warning the heavens opened indoors. Water rained from the ceiling in a deluge, thunder rumbled ominously, and lightning crackled with an eerie precision just beyond the windows. I froze, soaked to the bone and heart pounding, caught between panic and the surreal comedy of the situation. Nimbus, utterly unbothered, flicked his tail with the poise of a feline monarch. I tried to keep going, voice wavering, as the storm raged around us. "Pax! Pax!" I pleaded, desperately hoping the Latin for peace would calm this absurd tempest. To my astonishment, the storm began to abate. The rain slowed, thunder softened, and Nimbus's tail stopped flicking. Then, quite unexpectedly, those piercing green eyes blinked once, just once. It was a tiny gesture, but it felt monumental, a subtle truce between man and cat, chaos and calm. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the couch, dripping and breathless. Nimbus leapt down and settled beside me, his regal posture softened by a rare moment of affection. The room was silent except for the faint drip of water and the steady rhythm of my slowing heartbeat. Negotiations were never easy, especially when your adversary is a mysterious, possibly supernatural cat who commands the weather and demands worship in ancient Latin. But in that wet, chaotic moment, I realized that beneath the madness was a strange kind of companionship. Nimbus and I were unlikely partners in a cosmic comedy, navigating absurdity with a mix of desperation, humor, and the occasional, inexplicable miracle. And as I looked into those unblinking eyes, now blinking ever so slightly, I knew this was only the beginning of our journey. One way or another, we would find a way to coexist, or at least survive the next storm. "Salve, Nimbus," I've whispered, my voice thick with awe and exhaustion. "Let's try peace." Nimbus tilted his head a slow, deliberate blink. Then, as if granting a royal decree, he settled in, the unspoken treaty sealed. For now. But I had a feeling the weather and our lives would never be quite the same again. The evening settled around the house like a thick velvet curtain, muffling the usual suburban hum. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a scatter of papers and weather charts strewn haphazardly around me. Across from me, Missa, Jenkins shuffled through a battered notebook, his eyebrows furrowed in that familiar way he did when he was on the verge of a grand theory or a grand delusion. Above us both, Nimbus perched on the windowsill, his sleek black for a striking silhouette against the dim light. Those unblinking green eyes reflecting the flicker of the street lamp outside. "Look," Mr. Jenkins said, tapping the notebook with a finger stained from years of scribbling, "I think we've been looking at Nimbus all wrong. He's not just some bored cat with a flair for weather manipulation. This," he waved a yellowed parchment, "this might explain his powers. It's a fragment of an ancient text about a guardian spirit bound to watch over a territory, controlling elements to protect rather than punish." I blinked. Well, not literally. Nimbus was the one who didn't blink. A guardian spirit, like some mystical cat superhero. "That sounds a bit far-fetched, even for you, Jenkins," he grinned, the kind of grin that meant he'd already convinced himself. "Maybe, but look here." He pointed to a passage written in flowing Latin script. "This speaks of an entity that commands storms, calms tempests, and yet demands respect through ritual. Sounds a lot like our black enigma." Nimbus gave a soft, almost imperceptible purr, then lipped down gracefully, padding silently to my side. His emerald eyes locked with mine, unblinking as always. But this time there was something different, a subtle warmth. A flicker of something almost tender beneath the commanding gaze. I reached out hesitantly, hand trembling as it hovered over his fur. To my surprise, Nimbus nudged against it, the sleek fur brushing against my fingers. The sensation was electric, a strange mix of comfort and awe. "See," Mr. Jenkins whispered, leaning closer, "he's not just chaos, he's protection. He's been guarding this neighborhood all along." I swallowed hard, the absurdity of it all clashing with a sudden swell of affection. Here was a cat who could summon storms and speak Latin phrases that sounded like spells, yet who also wanted somehow to be understood and accepted. Feeling a surge of boldness, I grabbed the ancient text and began reading aloud, stumbling through the Latin phrases as best I could. The words rolled off my tongue, strange and melodic in the quiet room. As I spoke, a soft wind stirred, fluttering the papers around us, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. Nimbus sat back, eyes fixed on me, his posture regal yet relaxed. For the first time, the lines between the supernatural and the mundane blurred into something beautiful and absurd, a shared secret between man and cat. "Looks like we've got ourselves a real live guardian spirit," I said with a nervous laugh, glancing at Mr. Jenkins. "Indeed," he replied, notebook clutched tightly. "And you were the chosen human, apparently." Nimbus, the cat who never blinked, gave a slow, deliberate blink, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that felt like a benediction. I smiled, the chaos of the past weeks settling into a new kind of harmony. Maybe living with a cat who controlled the weather and spoke ancient languages wasn't so insane after all. Maybe it was exactly the kind of weird, wonderful companionship I never knew I needed. As the soft breeze drifted through the open window, scattering the remaining papers and carrying the fresh promise of rain, I felt the strange, unspoken bond between us deepen, a bond forged in absurdity, curiosity, and an unexpected tenderness. So I said, looking down at Nimbus, "What now, guardian of the suburbs? What's our next move?" Nimbus's green eyes gleamed with mischief and something unnameable, and for once, I wasn't afraid to find out. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The storm had finally begun to wane, the once furious winds softening into a gentle breeze that whispered through the battered trees and scattered debris. I found myself standing on the porch, rain slicking down my jacket, water pooling around my shoes, and a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. The sky, once an angry swath of charcoal and gunmetal, was now streaked with pale bands of sunlight, the clouds reluctantly giving way to a hesitant blue. Nimbus, as if sensing the shift in mood, had taken his familiar spot on the windowsill inside, his sleek black fur gleaming even in the dim light, those unblinking green eyes fixed silently on the clearing sky. For hours I'd battled the surreal tempest conjured seemingly by my own cat Nimbus, the creature who had turned my suburban life upside down with his mysterious powers and inscrutable demands. The thunderstorm inside my house, the Latin incantations muttered in the dead of night, the bizarre rituals I'd attempted all culminated in this moment of calm that felt almost too fragile to trust. The neighborhood was a study in post-storm bewilderment. Tom, my usually easygoing neighbor, was out front, shoveling mud off his driveway with a grimace that echoed my own exhaustion. I approached cautiously, unsure if I should say something or just commiserate in silence. He looked up, eyes wide but tired, and gave me a half smile. "Well," he said, "that was something else. I've never seen weather like that around here. Pretty sure my lawn sprinkler hasn't been on in days." I chuckled, the sound coming out a little shaky. "Yeah, Nimbus has a way of letting me know who's in charge." Tom raised an eyebrow but wisely said no more, just nodded and went back to work. Inside, Maggie arrived armed with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a smirk that was almost comforting. She gave me a once-over, eyes twinkling with that dry sarcasm I'd come to love. "So how's the weather god today?" she asked, handing me a cup. Humbled, I replied, taking a grateful sip, and more than a little soaked. She laughed softly, then lowered her voice. Maybe this whole thing is just a weird phase. Or maybe Nimbus just likes messing with you. Either way, you're rehandling it better than I expected." Her words grounded me, reminding me that no matter how absurd things got, I wasn't in this alone. Jenkins, true to form, was nearby, flipping through his ever-present notebook, like a mad scientist obsessed with decoding the storm's secrets. He muttered excitedly about precious systems and atmospheric anomalies, his eyes bright with the thrill of discovery even amid the chaos. Nimbus, for his part, remained regal and inscrutable. His gaze never wavered from the window, the faint glow of his green eyes somehow both unsettling and oddly reassuring. It was as if he was silently acknowledging the truce the storm had passed, but his presence was a constant, a reminder that chaos was never far away. As I looked around at the scattered leaves, broken branches, and soaked ground, I realized this was a turning point. The neighborhood, though battered, was beginning to recover, neighbors exchanging stories and helping each other patch up the damage. And I, too, was shifting from bewildered pet owner to someone who had learned to embrace the unpredictable, the weird, and the wonderful. "Looks like we're in this together," I said quietly, more to Nimbus than anyone else. The cat's eyes flicked to me for a brief moment, unblinking and intense, before he settled back into his throne on the windowsill, a silent king surveying his domain. And for the first time since Nimbus arrived, I felt a flicker of peace. The storm had passed, but our story was far from over. Life with Nimbus would remain a wild, chaotic dance, sometimes frustrating, often hilarious, and always utterly unpredictable. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. As the sun finally broke through the last of the clouds, casting warm light across the drenched street, I stepped back inside, ready to face whatever came next. Because if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that with Nimbus around, normal was a fleeting illusion, and that was perfectly okay. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew the cat that never blinks was watching, waiting, and perhaps, just perhaps, planning the next storm. I used to think that normalcy was this elusive, fragile thing, something I had to guard and protect at all costs. But after weeks of living with Nimbus, I realized that normal was a shape-shifting concept, especially when your cat might be a weather-controlling, Latin-muttering enigma demanding ritualistic worship. Tonight, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by the half-forgotten tools of my latest ritual, a candle, a worn Latin phrasebook, and an array of oddly arranged cat toys, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Nimbus, as regal as ever, was perched on the armrest of the couch, his sleek black fur shining under the soft glow of the lamp. His green eyes, unblinking as usual, were fixed on me with an intensity that could have sparked a minor thunderstorm, if he wished. It was no longer fear or frustration that filled me, but a kind of amused acceptance. The ritual didn't feel like a desperate plea anymore. It was more like a game we both played, a dance between human logic and feline enigma. I flipped through the phrase book again, murmuring a Latin incantation under my breath. Not because I believed it would change anything, but because it felt right. The rain outside tapped gently against the window, a steady rhythm that matched the calm beating of my heart. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, breaking the quiet. Maggie stood there, thermos in hand, her sharp eyes taking in the scene, with a mix of disbelief and amusement. "So," she said dryly, stepping inside and setting the thermos on the table, "this is your new religion." I shrugged, a grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Something like that." She plopped down on the couch next to Nimbus, who barely acknowledged her presence, maintaining his imperious gaze. "You know," Maggie continued, "you're really the only person I know who's trying to negotiate with a cat in dead languages." "Desperate times," I replied, "call for desperate rituals." Her laughter filled the room, a welcome break from the surreal tension that had been my constant companion. Maggie's presence grounded me, reminding me that amidst the chaos I wasn't alone. We talked about everything and nothing: the absurdity of Nimbus's powers, the weirdness of my rituals, and the strange peace I was beginning to find in all this madness. As if on cue, Nimbus flicked his tail, and the lights dimmed momentarily. Outside, a distant rumble of thunder rolled through the neighborhood, but inside, the air remained warm and dry. I watched, fascinated, as the mild storm raged just beyond the walls of my home, and for the first time, I felt a sense of awe rather than panic. Nimbus was in control, yes, but I was no longer fighting against it. I was learning to live in the eye of his storm. Later that night, I found myself talking quietly to Nimbus, the moonlight casting long shadows across the room. "I don't know what you are," I whispered, "but I think I'm okay with it, maybe even grateful." For a long moment, Nimbus said nothing. Then, very slowly, he blinked. Just once, a deliberate, measured blink that felt like a gesture of trust, or perhaps the beginning of one. In that small, unblinking world of his, I found a truce, not peace, exactly, not normalcy, but something better, a strange companionship shaped by chaos, humor, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the best way to deal with the impossible is to accept it and laugh. As the night deepened, I settled down beside him, ready to face whatever strange, unpredictable day Nimbus would conjure next. Because now, I wasn't just a bewildered pet owner, I was a willing participant in the absurd dance of life with the cat that never blinked. And somehow that was enough.